African Global Operations, which had since once traded as Bosasa, has gone into voluntary liquidation. The company says after the corruption allegations made at the state capture inquiry, financial institutions closed their bank accounts. Media reports suggest that the two banks are First National Bank and ABSA. Open News has reached out to both banks, but the banks have refused to verify reports citing client confidentiality as their reason. Bosasa says over the past few months they've been exposed to extensive reputational damage. This follows damning evidence given at the Zondo Commission. Now, this is where former Bosasa Angelo Agriti testified about corruption and bribes relating to the firm's contracts with the government. The company says over 4,000 employees will be affected by the liquidation process. So for more on this story, let's chat via Skype now to Cas Coovadia, the Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa. Mr. Coovadia, thank you so much for joining us. I think I'm going to start with the very obvious here. Your first thoughts on hearing about, number one, the voluntary liquidation of Bosasa and, of course, reports that FNB and ABSA have cut all ties with Bosasa and a few individuals implicated there as well.
Well, I read about the two banks closing their accounts this morning. I would not be privy to any details related to that because it would be inappropriate for me or anybody else to be privy to that because it's confidential interaction and a relationship between the bank and the client, and the bank would have interacted with appropriate regulators. But having said that, I guess it's not too surprising given everything we've seen in the public space through the Zondo Commission. And it's quite clear that the business was run in a way that was not ethical. And at some point in time, the problems had to come to a stage where they could not actually operate in any longer. So it's not too surprising, but yeah, and I guess the banks had to do what they had to do.
Okay, well, let's do this because at some point we need to start talking about the legalities behind this, because you say it's quite clear that the banks had to take this step. But at what point do banks actually make that decision? Do we wait for legal processes to take place? We understand that the Zondo Commission isn't necessarily a legal process that can lead to some kind of a prosecution. At what point do banks then decide to step in?
Well, there'd be different instances given different circumstances. So I mean, banks usually look at particularly accounts that are run by politically connected people carefully. If issues are raised with a bank by a regulator like the Financial Intelligence Center, the banks would look at those accounts carefully. If they pick up any suspicious activity going through an account, they are legally bound by regulation to report that to the Financial Intelligence Center office. And the Financial Intelligence Center office then investigates, and through a process of interaction between the bank and the Financial Intelligence Center office, certain decisions are taken. So there's a process in place, there's the regulations that banks need to meet, and if they don't meet those regulations, then there's severe downside for the banks. So it's not just reputational risk, it's also making sure that banks abide by anti-money laundering legislation, regulations that actually pertain to that, and they interact with the Financial Intelligence Center Authority to make sure that once things are flagged, certain decisions are taken. Again, in this case, I wouldn't know what the extent of those discussions were and what the detail of those discussions would have been. But banks do close accounts periodically. It's just that this one is in the public domain because of the Zondo Commission. But for various reasons, banks would close accounts if they pick up problems with particular accounts.
All right, well, let's leave it there. Mr. Cas Coovadia, the MD of the Banking Association of South Africa.